Hi, we're going to talk about some design principles that are in use in iOS 7 that are new to the interface guidelines and design for this update of iOS. So the first slide I have here is just a picture of a table view application, and I want to highlight some of the differences that we see. First of all, the navigation bar is much simplified, and it is contiguous with the system status bar up here at the top. That's because views, by default, are actually the same size as the whole screen, and they tuck up under the status bar. So we have a different look and feel right off the bat. I have my rows of my table view here, and this is actually in a demo that it's the second demo after this presentation. And then when we touch on our row, we get the same kind of interaction. We go to a new view, which is pushed through a segue, a push type segue, and then we just set the title of this new navigation bar to whatever we send in our segue. And then the back button is not skinned as a button anymore. It is simply a back icon, a chevron, with the title of the button up here. And so right from the beginning, we can see that there are very many user interface changes. Everything has been flattened. The skins of buttons and other user interface elements have been either taken away or flattened. So we'll see more of that as we go forth. So the single question I hear most of all is, why did Apple change everything? iOS 7 embraces actually a new design philosophy. And as you read the Apple's design documents, you will see three words over and over and over. And they are deference, clarity, and depth. The core concept is deference. In other words, we defer to the underlying content of the application over user interface elements. An app's user interface should never compete with the user's understanding of the content that the app provides. The focus is on the data, not on the presentation. The emphasis here is on clarity. We favor simple and clear icons, legibility of text at all sizes, and we emphasize functionality over adornment. And then the third concept is part and parcel of the first two. In order to give us a concept of clarity, and in order to defer to the content over the user interface, we use translucent layers to give a sensation of depth and also realistic motion. A layer in front of a layer in back will appear to move over the back layer as we turn the interface. And this is this enhances the user's understanding not only of what's going on right now, but of what they will go back to. Here's an example, and it's the most obvious example in the entire UIKit bag of tricks. It's buttons. The top button here, and it looks like text, it is text. The top button doesn't have an outline, doesn't have a background, it just says what it does. The rounded rect button that we're familiar with and has been our friend throughout our iOS development is gone. It's been deprecated. And it's been replaced in most cases in user interface design by a system button that, as I already said, has no skin. It has no outline. It has no edges. It has no inset. It has no border. It has no background. It may have an image, but that's it. The idea here is that the text that is on the button should say, "I'm a button," rather than the user interface adornment of that text. So button text should be a single verb or a verb phrase that very clearly describes what exactly is going to happen when the user touches it. The idea, again, is if the user clearly understands the button text, then the user will interact with it as they should. And you don't need all of this other stuff that takes away from the clarity of the user interacting with the content of the app. In other words, we are deferring, once again, we have deference to the content over the user interface. We can also use a custom button type, as we've done here. We can give it a background color and a text color. We can also give it borders. We can do a lot of different things, but we should only do this for clarity reasons, not to adorn the user interface such that it takes away from the clarity of the user dealing with the content. So again, the message is consistent. The user should feel that they are dealing directly with the content without a bunch of useless adornment. Apps are consistent, therefore, or at least they should be. They should be consistent with the design principles imposed by the system, the new ones, but they should also be consistent within themselves. So there are some enhancements to views within iOS 7 to help us all achieve this. One is all of the full screen views really do take up the full screen. They're not the full screen minus a status bar space or a nav bar space or a toolbar space. They actually do take up the full screen. Also, and very importantly, views have a new property, and it's called tint. And all views have this property. All view subclasses have a tint property. This is a color that is applied by default to all controls in the view. For buttons, it's the text color. For sliders, it's the color of the portion of the slider that has been between, let's say, the left edge of the slider and the thumb. For other controls, it is color applied to those controls in different ways. So we're going to look at that next. But the tint color helps us maintain consistency from view to view, and view controller's view to view controller's view within our application. So let's look at that. The default tint is sort of what I like to call apple blue. So we've got a button and we've got a segmented control, we've got a slider, we've got a progress bar, we have a counter control, and the default tint is this blue color. And all we've done here is we've set the tint on the view, and all of these other controls' tint has adopted that tint. Here we've just set the tint on the view to a red tint, and we notice that all of the controls adopt that tint as their own. Now we can override any particular control's tint, but we really shouldn't do that, or at least consider that we shouldn't do that, because again, the emphasis is on clarity and on a consistent look and feel, not only between apps, but also within our own apps as we move forward with this new operating system. So some further notes and some thoughts. Even though the user interface element stuff and the guidelines have changed, UIKit development remains essentially the same. So as we develop with UIKit, we're going to see the same sorts of patterns being used, the same kind of code being used. Very importantly, if you've not already done so, transition your applications to storyboards and try in as much as possible to no longer use the nib file methodology. The reason for this is the focus is on storyboard-oriented development. For example, as we looked at our first slide, our second slide, that showed the table view application, table views now no longer use, or it's still available, but it's been deprecated, the method table view did select row at index path. Instead, the accent is, and the boilerplate code that you're given for a table view controller now uses the prepare for segue sender method. So use the storyboards and embrace the storyboard idea in your apps moving forward. And finally, Before you move on very much further with this, you need to read 3 document sets, and they are all found at the link provided here, and I'll also show you this in just a moment. The documentation is found at developer.apple.com, library, iOS, design, index, and then a particular page is popped up. It is the iOS 7 User Interface Transition Guide, the iOS Human Interface Guidelines, and the UIKit User Interface Catalog. So let's look at that. So I brought this web page up, and we can see that we have a very clear web page that, in fact, also adopts what we might call iOS 7 design principles. It's very clear. There's a lot of negative space being used, but here is where we find the transition guide, the human interface guidelines, and the UIKit interface catalog for iOS 7. Thank you very much.